On a recent video, I went down the rabbit hole as I started to research into the history of Bitcoin, looking at specific dates in the past and what happened to get to the point of where we find ourselves today. Of course, that point is over 120,000 US dollars per Bitcoin, but of course it wasn't always this way. Bitcoin started at zero. Now, I know generally I do market update videos, and I'll still include that in today's video, but I just found myself so enthralled by the history and the dates that had come up as I continued to research and go down this rabbit hole through history, and I didn't want any of this history to be lost. That's what I'm going to look at today, and then I'm going to relate it back to the period of time that we are in and why I still think there is further to go in this cycle, why I don't think the time's up just yet, and when we get to these peaks, how not to let ourselves get too carried away with what's going on and how things can change for Bitcoin in the future. Subscribe to the channel, like the video. Actually, let me know in the comments section if you do enjoy this type of video as well. I just want to do something that's a little bit more interesting to myself as opposed to the daily market update, because today not much has happened. The best thing about what happened today is that we tested the lows again, washed out a few more of the traders, the leverage, and then closed higher. So that's a pretty good sign. The second thing, not so good, is that we are now on 2 days down from the all-time high. The thing we don't want to see next is another day down. So that's going to be the main thing that I'll follow up in the video, the update coming possibly over the weekend or on Monday. Ideally, we see the market rally here, take out the top, so above 123,822. We get a day up. Things are looking good. Everything else has been playing out relatively well, especially after we saw our big move up, the 7 to 10 day rule. Spare me a day here. We got 11 days and the market corrected from that point. So that's what we were watching. October is typically that time where we start to see pretty significant moves. And this is a chart that I shared with you guys when I did the end of month and the coming month analysis. It's the beginning of the end, October and Q4. But from here, October, November, December is pretty much 71% of the time where this market ends. So the cycle is over. And as I've talked about, I don't think it's over now. I don't think we've seen the top in the cycle. I don't think the 4-year cycle breaks. There's no such thing as a 4-year cycle breaking. And that's if you're looking at your theories of the low to the low. 71% of the time, you will see a top within the next 2 months. And we saw that back in 2013. We saw it in 2017. We saw it in 2021. And we've seen a top recently as well in December, January of 24-25. It looks like we've got within 90 days to find this next top. And I have extended it out to early January, as I pointed out with the cycle theory as well, going back to 2010, 1,150 days. The next cycle, 1,060 days, next cycle, 1,060 days. So people are often looking at these two. And then a lot of people try to use this low here in October of 2011, but I don't think that's a turning point or a cycle low to measure from. And that's what led me to the rabbit hole of what happened in the market back here. What happened in October 2010? Now, this 2-year period stemming from October 2009 to October 2011 is pretty difficult to find any sort of history on. And most of it is relatively similar in the articles that I was able to find. So that is a really good start to see that the information isn't contradictory. But the idea here, the rabbit hole I was going down, it was to try and find a reason for the starting point or to discredit that starting point as well for the cycle theory. Let's have a look at the history briefly of Bitcoin from the earliest days of where it started to essentially trade in some manner. And October 12, 2009, there was someone that sent 5,050 Bitcoin, which was $5 worth, to New Liberty Standard via PayPal. So at that time, that was for a website. And at that time, $1 was equal to 1,300 Bitcoins. So that gave us a starting point. And then the market trended down and sideways. There's a bit of a jump here in the data. And then there is a bit of missing data at times as well. But the next important event comes in May 22, 2010. So that's Bitcoin Pizza Day. 10,000 Bitcoin, equaling roughly $40, was sent for 2 pizzas. And we know now that one Bitcoin was worth 0.4 cents. So I've got 0.004, so that's of a dollar. So it's 0.4 of a cent or a penny for the Americans. Now, next thing is a 2 months later, July 7th, 2010, new software is released. The price is now 0.008 of a dollar, so it's doubled from that point there. Now, there are a few articles that have recorded this over time. This one here is from Reuters, and the date goes back to 2018. You can see the new Liberty Standard establishes the value at 1,309 Bitcoin per dollar, and that was from the software developer from Finland, sends 5,050 Bitcoin, and it's realized using PayPal, and just wanted to seed a new Bitcoin exchange site called New Liberty Standard. And then a few other important notes here were from February and May, of course, the pizza day. Here comes July. Bitcoin's new software is released by the community of developers. And over the next 5 days, there is a 10-fold increase in its exchange value from 0.008 to 8 cents. So now we've got a full, well, at least valued more than a cent. 10 days later, Mt. Gox is launched. So this is where the big stuff starts to come, because this is the first time where you can really get a whole lot of money into Bitcoin. So you can see here on the chart, it's gone from 0.8 cents to 8 cents. July 18 I have here. The article says 17, but I found some other articles that said 18 because I guess it's a business day. They talked about it being launched. The next day it's launched. Mt. Gox is launched, and there's a price. And this is obviously a massive event for Bitcoin at the time, and will become even a bigger event 4 years later when Mt. Gox collapses in 2014. So we're going through a similar repeat of, say, FTX collapsing in 2022. That was when the everyday person could buy Bitcoin, and it collapsed in 2022, whereas this is going back to 2010. And basically like an 8-year cycle repeat. So that's July, big spike up. We get to August, and there is a vulnerability discovered. And the price is at 6 cents. The vulnerability is that you can now print as much Bitcoin as possible. First, exploit an emergency hard fork. Hard fork just means that the code has then been changed and everyone goes in this direction as opposed to the original direction there. That starts to get into some other conversations with things like people that are still loving or still exposed to Bitcoin Cash. That's a story for another day. And just an interesting point there, Bitcoin Cash was actually invented or forked, you could say, in August of 2017. So a 7-year repeat there from when they had the first exploit, an emergency hard fork. They had to do this because there was an attacker and they created a transaction generating over 92 billion Bitcoin, far exceeding Bitcoin's intended supply. But it was actually a doubling of that. There was 184 billion sent to 2 different wallets. So this exploit led to a swift response from the developers who patched the bug and implemented a hard fork, invalidating the fraudulent transactions and restoring security to the network. Through this rabbit hole, these things can happen in the future, but it's very unlikely at this stage because of how far Bitcoin has developed from. So there's never a 0% chance of these things happening, but it is so difficult now because it is so expensive to do anything like that, that it's almost impossible for it to happen. But technology is forever changing. So something just to keep in mind there as well. I've labeled this date here, September 18, 2010. Price is at 6 cents, so it's come down from that point. Not too much happened to the price when the vulnerability was exploited and all this Bitcoin was created, because within 5 hours they got rid of it. That's how easy it was to do things back then. We had a low, and then we find ourselves at October 8, 2010. So we're literally on the money of 15 years from this particular low here, where the price was basically slammed to 1 cent and then bounced back. So even if it wasn't slammed down to 1 cent and it was at 5 or 4 cents, it's still a very important time, I think, as we've come out of a pretty good news piece with Mt. Gox being launched, and then price didn't go anywhere. There was a whole lot of bearishness that happened here, the cryptocurrency being exploited, billions being printed, and then from that point we saw a 3-day rally to 13 cents, and then it had to consolidate again. So I think there is a fair bit of history there leading into that point that could warrant a significant turning point to be noted for in the future. Now, from that point, there was a lot more use cases being developed. The first being February 2011, Silk Road starts accepting Bitcoin as payment. The price is now 50 cents per Bitcoin. So it's a pretty long way up from the 1 and sort of 10 cent area that Bitcoin was. Silk Road was developed by Ross Ulbricht, who was pardoned, I believe, this year in 2025 by Donald Trump when he became president. He's basically been in jail for a very long time for Silk Road. So he's now pardoned. So good to see an end to that story. But Silk Road invented there, therefore giving Bitcoin even more of a use case to be used. 50 cents, it now climbs to $1, pulls back, continues to climb. And this is where things get even more interesting. By June 14, we also saw WikiLeaks starting to use Bitcoin as payment. And by that stage, it had risen to $19 when the announcement was made by WikiLeaks on their X post, or their Twitter account at the time. WikiLeaks now accepts anonymous Bitcoin donations, yada, yada, and you can go and check that for yourself. But that is a really important period of time because now we have two places that are accepting or using Bitcoin on the internet. You can see the price rose to $32 and then had that pullback in time. And that's where we get the first very significant pullback of roughly 90% after we had Mt. Gox, we had Silk Road using Bitcoin, and we had WikiLeaks also accepting Bitcoin as well. And another interesting point, you've got the WikiLeaks founder also being released from his incarceration for the last 14 years, happening in 2024. So two of these events have occurred in the last couple of years. I think that's pretty interesting how they used it around the same time and have now been released around the same time. And that gets us to October 19th, 2011, 1 year since 2010 cycle low, and the price is now $2.04. So I'm claiming that as a pretty important time point in the entire cycle. One could go back a little further, but prior to that, there is not really enough solid data, and you just had Mt. Gox created. So now we're able to get some solid data from that point. We had some bearish activity, pretty bearish for Bitcoin at the time, and then we led to a turning point in the market. Whether you want to use that as a significant low, or you can even use it as the breakout time that Bitcoin decided to get past these highs after the bearish news of August in 2010. Coming forward to the present time again after that mini history lesson, that's one of the main reasons why I'm using this October 10 low and these dates. And I think it's important to get these dates right. Otherwise, we could be left astray looking forward into the future. There was a lot that happened back then. I think that warrants a pretty solid evidence for time. But if you disagree, let me know in the comment section. Let me know your thoughts with specific sources as to why this should be or shouldn't be a starting point in the market. And now from there, 1,148 days takes us to January of 2026. So basically the first half of January 2026 for what some might say is an extended cycle because they're just referencing the last two cycles. However, looking at the first cycle, the Genesis cycle, we had a bit of information come through from 2009, 2010, and then we really started to get the solid point there. I've got these dates here, and we can also look at the midpoint between them. So 1,150, 1,060 gives you somewhere around 1,100. So 1,100 days takes us back to basically the last week of November, first week of December. So that's why I'm looking at quarter four, potentially into the first half of January. Therefore, we have to say quarter one as well. But where the market sits at the moment still looks pretty damn good. And I don't think we've got to the point of complete euphoria, thrill, or belief, even though we still hear of the CEO of Coinbase issuing a $1 million Bitcoin price prediction within the next 5 years, of course, so that comes out to 2030. I think that's almost impossible, but of course more of these claims will come out as we see the price begin to increase. And if it happens to increase relatively quickly, if we were to see Bitcoin run from 120 to 140 to 150, then we're obviously going to hear a lot more about why this should be the case. Next 5 years, it's definitely on the cards. And then you get the random crazies like Matt Kaiser changing predictions from 200K to $2 million. Max Kaiser is literally just out there trying to pump his own bags of Bitcoin. Fine, do what you got to do. Probably can't go to jail for it, and he's just going to keep talking nonsense like $2 million Bitcoins. That's essentially what the game is about when we get to these peaks. Things like calling for $122,000 Bitcoin in 2025, like I did back in January, is not going to make any sort of headlines. But of course, that's been the closest thing to what we have right now, literally sitting right on 122 with less than 90 days to go in the year. Now, the other claim I had here is that it's possibly going to get to around 144 for 2025, and that's based on some extensions here of price ranges. Now, I don't think there is a chance that we go to 340,000 this cycle for all the reasons I've given prior. So if we do start to hear about bigger and bigger price targets, just like we do with the crazy people out there, Crazy Kaiser calling for $2 million Bitcoin and saying it's going to happen in 2025, just remember, for it to get there, the market caps need to be crazy high. And even for Bitcoin to get to 340,000 in this cycle, it'd have to be somewhere around a $6-7 trillion market cap. People would say it's possible. Gold is now at $26 trillion, whereas when I wrote this post 2 months ago, it was at $23 trillion. The tops of markets are all about the delusion. That's what happens. That's why it's called the euphoria. I'm a genius, we're all going to be rich, the thrill of the price going up, and then the full-on belief that there is no stopping this. And I think this is a good post as well, looking at how things change over time from the depression to where they currently sit. Viv wrote in June, a handful of stocks pushing the S&P 500 higher is nothing to shout about. Yet, that's exactly what everyone has shouted about the whole way. And every time I come back to this post, it reminds me of how the market can get it so wrong at the time, or at least how retail can. So nothing against Seth. I very much appreciate the comment because it's a huge learning along the way as we go through the years being in the market and how things change. June, there's a quick remember, the cream always rises to the top. So we saw that cream rising to the top now for over nearly 2.5 years. In November of 2024, I wrote, I guess it was something to shout about. And then in February, 18 months later, everyone was still shouting about how the market should not go up because it was just being pushed by a few stocks. And now everyone's still saying, shouting about it, that the stocks shouldn't go up because there is so few of them pushing it up. And now it's basically just AI. And the profit and earning ratios are way out of whack. In particular, things like Tesla, hugely out of whack. But you can't bet against the cult. And Tesla is very well known for cult trading. So don't bet against the cult, just keep riding the trend. So I don't know how that sounds to the everyday listener, but to the regulars, they probably know that I'm still very bullish on the market. And if you're looking for something more realistic in how to trade and invest long term, if you're getting serious about it, check out TIA Premium. There is a link in the top of the video description. You'll get the free reports and access to Discord where you can check out the results and reviews from many of our members there. So don't delay, check that out. Let's continue on with Bitcoin for the short term here. And the cycle continues to tell us that we've got further to go to the upside. So just looking at the stats and the history of Bitcoin over the last 5 and 10 years combined, 2020 and 2015, the market suggests further upside, as it has done through this entire cycle, with the composite going pretty well for our roadmap for what comes next. The sentiment is still grinding out here. We're still in greed after that day down, so that's a good thing there. And it's continued to consolidate as well. You're seeing the exchange volume continue to climb higher. We want to see a breakout of the mid $70 billion. There's still more liquidity out there. Therefore, I think there's still further upside. And even though that liquidity is getting wiped out time and time again on the leveraged positions here, the last 24 hours being $500 million of longs getting liquidated, people still want more. They're still coming back for more. The exchange volume average is continuing higher. The sentiment is still not out of this world in extreme greed and not in extreme fear. It's just doing its thing, grinding higher. So we're seeing that across the board. The stablecoin liquidity is still there as well. As we were talking about, we're looking for a rally here. We got that, and the rally has come out so far dead on 50%. The top 4.44%, the 50% level 4.45%. So dead on that now. So if we are to see a bit of a pause here or a little bit of a push down, good things are happening because that high should be a lower high. And therefore, we're now underneath roughly that midpoint of this entire trading range. If we do start to head down, bam, you're going to see some big things coming there, and probably going to first go with Bitcoin and then follow suit across to some of the stronger alts there like Ethereum. It's had a couple of days down here off the double top, which in the last few hours has been supported at the 50% extension. So that's this one here that I'm showing you on the screen, double top, looking to trade that short. It has found support, so basically a resistance of the short trade, which is a good thing for the bulls, not so good for the bears here. Now, of course, this needs to continue to consolidate above 4,400, and then we should see a break out of the double top. We know from history, breakings of double tops are a strong signal in themselves, meaning it's a now bullish signal. So from going from a short signal, you get a break of the short signal that tells you that the market is getting ready to go the opposite direction in a pretty strong fashion. Bitcoin versus the alts, Binance still doing very well, Ethereum trying to come back, and as I speak, XRP is now on par with Bitcoin for this cycle after overtaking it in December and January, trying to hold out, tested once again in July, and is basically the same increase as Bitcoin for this cycle. So pay attention to the risk in your portfolios as well. You've got some pretty good moves happening down here. They look like they want to continue higher. XRP hasn't really done too much, and Solana is still holding the gains that it has put in through this entire cycle. The S&P 500 is still holding up, although it hasn't really gone anywhere for this week, and that looks similar to the 5-year cycle that I've been sharing with you guys. It is wanting to consolidate, and you can see that happening at the moment. Any sort of movements down is just going to be part of what has happened already in the past, just looking at these 5-year cycles, and then I think there's further to go for the rest of this year, but at the moment it's just holding out here, trying to consolidate on the grind higher. The US dollar has been climbing higher as well, as we've been talking about, off this double bottom. So that's where the signal came, spoke about it in mid-September. We had the move higher, the pullback, and then short term looking for 100 to 103 before I think it'll get rejected at that point, and then long term will continue down, and that'll just continue to fuel the everything bubble. Bubble up. We've got some key lows that the markets have all formed at, and we're all bubbling higher except for the home builders ETF. The home builders are what I'm calling the canary in the coal mine to the overall cycle. That's the 18-year cycle here. So everything's still bubbling up except the home builders. I think that's going to come to an end sometime 25, 26, as we've pointed out for years now on the channel. But before that happens, let's just keep riding the bubble. And if you're ready to take your trading and investing seriously with a community of like-minded investors, TIA Premium, check the link down below. We will be increasing the price and capping TIA as we lead into the peak of this cycle. And that is happening very, very soon. So if you've been thinking about it and you've been on the fence, now is the time to act. Link in the video description. And before the cycle wraps up, I still think we have a couple of price targets to hit. The mid 130s, not far off now, something I've been sharing for a long time. The mid 140s, something that I shared 9-10 months ago from the post here, possibly 144. And if we're really lucky, I think we blow past the 160s into the 180s. So keep watching that, hit the like, subscribe to the channel. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section about the history lesson or the history research that I went down with the rabbit hole there for what happened in Bitcoin back in 2010. And I'll see you guys back here at the next video. Have a fantastic weekend. Cheers.